نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You know, every week I always commence by saying that it's a great honor and a great privilege to be associated with such a blessed gathering, such a blessed assembly. And I want you all to know that I don't say this as just a refrain, just a pleasantry, just something nice to say, but when I look at this group and I think that these are people that could be any number of places doing any number of things that voluntarily give of their Tuesday evenings to come into this space, spend time with each other in hope of learning something that will enhance us in our relationship with Allah, I am truly honored to be a part of this majlis. This is Word to the Wise. And in this space, we aim to impart easy to implement, practical, easy to act upon spiritual wisdom. And to do this, we've been reading from a traditional book, an old book. And this book is focused on the refinement of character, on the development of praiseworthy states in your heart and in your character. We've been talking for the last few lessons, and this is actually the last section of the book, and then there's a short appendix about the companions of the Prophet, radiyallahu anhum jami'an. May God be pleased with all of them. And here he says, worldly possessions occupied their hands, not their hearts. You know, when we talk about zuhud, being a zahid, is being someone that voluntarily gives of the excessive pleasures of this world. Someone that forgoes some of the luxuries of this life for the sake of receiving those luxuries when they meet God. And he says, being a zahid, being a person of zuhud, is not about what you actually have or don't have. It's not about what you own or don't own. It's about what owns you. You see? It's not about what you own, but what owns you. A person could have abundant wealth, but still not be owned by any of it. This is why the definitive sign of a proper relationship with money is your willingness to give it away. See, a person that won't give it away, man, that's a funny shirt. I just realized your shirt says Bebsi. SubhanAllah. A person that won't give it away is withholding not because of how they own their wealth, but rather their wealth owns them. A person of zuhud is someone that is owned by nothing besides God Almighty. Doesn't matter what they own. You know, one of my teachers, he told me a story about this sheikh, this master of the teachings, living in the desert in a tent, and he had one disciple, he had one student, and they lived in a rural area away from the city, and the student needed to go to the city to run an errand or fulfill some need. And the sheikh told him, after you get to the city and you complete your errand, ask people about Sheikh so-and-so. Once you find him, sit with him, benefit from him, and then ask him if he has any advice for me. So the student went to the city, he ran his errand, and then he started asking people, do you know where I can find Sheikh so-and-so? And they said, you see that qasr? You see that palace down there at the end of the road? He lives there. And the student thought, a sheikh that lives in a palace? Impossible. So he approached the palace, he knocked on the door. He said, I might be mistaken, but I've been told that this is the residence of so-and-so. And the person that answered the door said, no, this is his residence. If you wait here in the reception area, Ghurfat al-Istiqbal, he'll be down to receive you. And the student said he came down like a spiral staircase, and he was dressed beautifully. And he said that he hosted him very beautifully, and he spoke with him. But at the end of their meeting, he said, my sheikh, he wanted to know if you had any advice for him. And he said, tell your sheikh that I said he should stop loving the dunya. And the student thought, my sheikh living in a tent in the middle of the desert in abject poverty, you're living in a palace with servants, and you have the audacity to tell my teacher, stop loving the dunya? And the student walked out of his house angrily. And so when he got back to his village, the sheikh checked in with him. Did you meet so-and-so? He said, yes. How was he? I was impressed with him until I asked him if he had any advice for you. He said, did he have advice for me? He said, yeah. He said, you should stop loving the dunya. You should stop loving the stuff of the transitory world. And his sheikh broke down and started weeping. And the student probably was thinking, yeah, I thought it was bad too. The sheikh said, no, I don't have any of what he has, but God knows that in my heart I long for it. I wish I had it. He might have all that you see him with, but his heart is not attached to it in the way that my heart is attached to it. They say it's not about what's in your heart, it's not about what's in your hand, it's about what's in your heart. A person might have nothing in their hand, but the dunya fills their heart. You know how I know? Because I'm African American. No, I'm just kidding. No, in all seriousness, you find people, they have nothing, but all they do is sit around talking about dunya. This person just bought a private plane, and Shannon Sharp was about to get $100 million, and then somebody filed a $50 million sexual assault lawsuit, so he's not getting the money. But did you see the car that Beyonce bought Jay-Z for his birthday? I'm thinking to myself, subhanAllah, this isn't even your dunya. We're not even talking about your money that you're preoccupied with. You're preoccupied with someone else's money. How silly is that? You know, Imam Malik, there's a funny story about Imam Malik and Zuhud. Imam Malik was a great scholar of Medina, and he was known to dress extremely well. And he was known to change clothes 2 times a day. And he would eat meat every day, which was an extreme luxury. And when he taught hadith, he would put a chamberlain, like a person to stand guard outside of his majlis, and he would burn the most exquisite bukhur, the most exquisite incense. And it's mentioned that some of his students encountered the students of another sheikh. And the students of the other sheikh said, Imamuna akthar min imamikum hadithan. Our imam knows more hadith than your imam. And the students of Imam Malik said, we don't think so. And he said, Imamuna afqa min imamikum. Our imam has more fiqh. He understands the halal and the haram more deeply than your imam. And the students of Imam Malik said, we don't think so. And then he said, our imam azhad min imamikum. Our imam is more otherworldly than your imam. Our imam turns away from the delights of the dunya more than your imam. And the students of Imam Malik said, yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right. You're probably right about that. He was known to be a person who appreciated the luxuries of dunya. But once someone challenged him and they said, how can you be an imam of the sunnah, but you do all of these luxurious things? And Imam Malik said, we don't do any of the things you've enumerated without praising Allah. So if a person experiences ease or privilege or comfort, and it's a source of their praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it can be good for them. It's not a source of their arrogance. It's not a source of their delusion. It's not a source of their conceit. It's not a source of their superciliousness, which is a super silly word, right? It's a source of their praise, a source of their gratitude. Then even the money you have in your hand, it's still something good for you. You can still be a person of otherworldliness. But when your wealth, when your money leads to distraction, leads to delusion, then you've forsaken zuhud. You can't be a zahid in that way. He said, whenever they lost any money, they bore this patiently. Subhanallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. That He's going to test us with loss, among other things in lives, He's going to test us with fear, and نَقْصٍ مِّنْ أَمْوَالِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ, a decrease in your money and the worldly fruits of your labor. This is one of the tests that the believer endures. That losing money and bearing it patiently, losing wealth and bearing it patiently, this is one of the tests that Allah promises the believer. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, اغتنم أربعة قبل أربعة. He said, take advantage of 4 things before 4 other things. Take advantage of your youth before your old age. I'm getting to an age where I can tell you, take advantage of your youth before your old age. He said, take advantage of your free time before your preoccupation. Take advantage of your wealth before your poverty. Take advantage of your good health before your sickness. One scholar said, if you look at everything mentioned in this hadith in toto, it suggests that we are subject to the vicissitudes of life. We go up and we go down. Today, mashallah, most of you appear to be very well. One day you might be ill. Today, most of you appear to be very young. One day you might be old. SubhanAllah, I'm getting to the place. I was in Memphis, Tennessee over the weekend with one of my old classmates from Azhar. And his father looked at me and said, man, Ubayd, what are you using, man? What do you have that you have no gray hair in your beard? I said, a pair of tweezers. That's what I'm using. We're all aging. فَمَنْ نُعَمِّرْهُ نُنَكِّسْهُ فِي الْخَلْقِ. Allah says, whoever we give a long life, نُنَكِّسْهُ فِي الْخَلْقِ, we reverse them in their creation. Whereas after being strong, they become weak. After being very intelligent, you might become feeble-minded. After being very capable, you might become incapable. That's the arc. That's the narrative arc of life. The same thing is true of wealth. They say with dunya, there is only two possibilities. Either you leave it in death, or it leaves you in poverty. One of those is certainly going to happen. So while you have money, either in wealth or just in life, use it for good. But if you are forced to endure the loss of money, bear that loss patiently, proactively, but patiently. Right? This is one of the things that distinguishes the believer. If they lose money, subhanAllah. I remember hearing it said that Muslims have always welcomed the arrival of two categories of people. One, guest. Two, children. Because anything that my guests consume at my home, it was already written for them. It was never mine. It was always going to arrive to them. Anything that they consume at my home. Your guests are not an inconvenience to you. Your guests are a source of blessing to you. Right? That's money that Muslims never had a problem spending. Guests that come over unannounced, guests that come over unexpectedly, come in. And they would just start to share whatever it was they had. This was like a Muslim ethic. One of my friends, he was at Cornell doing his PhD. And he said that he was studying, he was at a conference with some very, very dedicated Marxists. Because I think he uses kind of a materialistic analysis of history in his research. So he was conferencing with like these hardcore Marxists that were all talking about capitalism and the redistribution of wealth and honoring labor and how all of us are just inundated and intoxicated with this obsession with money and material things. And he said he was, as a Muslim, the conversation was like resonating with him, like, we gotta figure out, how to figure out how to just reorient our priorities when it comes to money and stuff like that. He said after they finished, they argued for about 30 minutes about who was going to pay how they were going to pay the bill. No, wait. What did you had the latte and you had what did you have? And he said, subhanAllah, all of this high-minded theory about redistributing wealth and about reorienting ourselves toward money, and nobody in our gathering could spare $25 so that we could all drink coffee. He said it was the most paradoxical thing that we're talking about Marxism and capitalism and Mark Fisher's capitalist realism. And at the end of that 2-hour, get together, hey man, what did you, you had 2 lattes. Wait, hold on. He said with Muslims, we would be fighting each other to pay the bill. No, I got it. No, I got it. You got it last time. He said, this is an expression of the right relationship to dunya. I never mind hosting my guest. I never mind hosting my friends. This is an honor for me to be in a position to treat my friend to lunch or to dinner or to a cup of coffee. We're gonna sit there and, wait a minute, hold on, man. No, don't forget the tax, You owe $7.28. And if you don't have exact change, you can Zelle me. Just give me the $7, Zelle me the 28 cents. Now let's talk about Frederick Engels. What's happening here? what's happening here? Right? Muslims have never been like that. And Muslims have never been like that about children. You know, when I was in my 4th year, every year at Azhar, we had a class called Qadaya Fiqhiyya al-Mu'asira, contemporary fiqh issues. And it was always my favorite class, Qadaya Fiqhiyya al-Mu'asira. One year, we studied all of the ahkam related to plastic surgeries, cosmetic, a'mal tajmiliyya. And seeing like these Azhari sheikhs talking about breast augmentations and, you know, you had to talk about, you know, different kinds of implants and rhinoplasty, and it was interesting. It was an interesting conversation to have in classical Arabic. It was interesting. Like, subhanAllah. One year we talked about the stock market. That was interesting too. But the year that I remember most was when we talked about birth control. Talked about tahdeed, tahdeed al-nasl, birth control. And at that time, Shaykh al-Azhar, a man named Sheikh Tantawi, he wrote a book in which he was encouraging poor people not to have so many children. You know, because the average family size in Egypt is still about 4 or 5 children. And he said, you know, children are a blessing, but they're also a responsibility. And if you're not in a position to provide, you know, a quality upbringing for your children, then maybe you should rethink having so many children. He said, take the case of all of these people that have moved into these cemeteries. You know, in Egypt, you had this movement, like about 30 years ago, where in these big cemeteries that had like these like maqams, like these mausoleums, poor people were breaking the locks on these mausoleums and moving their families into them. The living are more entitled to housing than the dead. That was the saying. The living deserve housing more than the dead. They moved their families into the cemeteries. There were so many people living in the cemeteries that the Egyptian government started running water and electricity to the cemeteries. Sheikh Tantawi was saying, oh, this is just really bad, and we have all of these street children that are wandering around and selling things. And I remember reading this and being, not compelled by it, but at the very least I was considering it. So, you know, birth control as a means of not deepening one's poverty. And one of my classmates, he said, man, that was the worst waste of time I've ever spent in my life reading that book. I can't believe he spent 200 pages trying to encourage poor people not to have children. It's a disgrace. He should have spent the 200 pages encouraging wealthy people to give their zakah. He spent 200 pages trying to convince poor people not to have kids. This is a disgrace. This is what's wrong with modern Islamic scholarship. I was like, yeah, right. I was actually considering the merit of his argument. He said, doesn't he realize when people are poor, they don't think of children as just another financial responsibility. Children are a source of hope. I'm already poor, and somehow I'm finding a way to make it. If I have a child, we're going to find a way to make it. And if I have 2, we're going to find a way to make it, because we always find a way to make it. He said, this is the ethic of people that are faced with poverty. They don't think about children as just a bill. Sheikh Tantawi is crazy. And I said, you know what, Sheikh Tantawi probably is crazy. I actually think Sheikh Tantawi was crazy at the end of his life. But my point is that Muslims have never thought about guests in that way. We've never thought about children in that way. Now, I'm not telling people, I'm not giving a hukum on family planning, and, I'm not, Bismillah, marhaban bikum, right? If you want to know the ruling, the hukum was halal, right? You shouldn't do it indefinitely, but if you're like, we don't want to have children until a certain time, or until he finishes school, I finish school, alhamdulillah, there's nothing wrong with that. But this idea of thinking of children as just, a source of financial burden, that's just not our ethic, right? That's not the way that Muslims have related to dunya. That's not the way Muslims have related to a loss of money. He said, and whenever they gained anything, they thanked Allah. God simply tested them with poverty in the beginning, to the point that their inner light was perfected and their conscience purified, at which time he dispersed wealth to them. So he said, in the case of the Sahaba, may God be pleased with them, they were tested with poverty at the beginning. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, being a Muslim meant sacrificing a lot of your trade relationships. It meant being ostracized, excommunicated from your tribe. It really entailed a loss of your worldly status and position. This is the reason that scholars say the term munafiq, the term hypocrite, never used in Mecca. Because in Mecca, there was nothing to gain through an association with Islam. Only loss, only sacrifice. In Medina, when the Muslims gained a modicum of worldly power, then there was something to be gained through an association with Islam, right? So he said the Sahaba, they were tested with poverty just so that God could perfect their inner light. I'll say this. Wealth is a test and poverty is a test. I myself ask for the test of wealth. I don't ask for the test of, I ask for the test of wealth. And I pray that Allah give me that test and make me faithful to it. But it is important to recognize that wealth is a test. Wealth is not some, free pass to just go about, doing whatever you want. I realize that, in some quarters of our society, privilege has become almost an accusatory word. You have privilege. Check your privilege. Privilege is not something that can be removed from the human experience, right? Some of us were born sighted. Others born without the ability to see. Some of us were born hearing impaired. Some of us hear fine. Some of us were born into material comfort. Others born into struggle. Some people are tall. In Arabic they say, fituli heiba, wa fil qisri khayba. They say, in height there is victory, but in being short in stature there's defeat. Right? Tafadul fil arzaq. People are given different provisions. This is a sunnah min sunanillahi fi khalqi. This is one of the ways of God in the creation of God. People have different advantages, different benefits. Any attempt to pretend like those don't exist is futile. We don't believe that privilege can be forfeited. We believe that privilege should be moralized. We don't believe in the forfeiture of privilege. Don't give away your privilege. Use your privilege for moral ends. The privileges you have, use them for good. That's what we believe. Privilege must be moralized. It's not that a person gets up and expresses, shame for their privilege and somehow they're acquitted. That as long as they say, I realize that I have privilege and there's other people who wish that they had what I have and this, that, and then now let's go have dinner. No. You do have privilege. What are you going to do with it? You see? That is the test of wealth. هو الذي رفع هو الذي جعلكم خلائف الأرض ورفع بعضكم فوق بعض درجات ليبلوكم فيما آتاكم. It is God that made you the possessors of everything you own. And God raised some of you above others in rank to test you in what he has given you. You know, one of my teachers, he said, it's very important that we understand this idea of God raising some of us above others in rank in a dynamic way, not a static way. It isn't that people that have money are just better than people who don't. In almost every scenario in life, you go in and out of positions of advantage and disadvantage. Always you're being raised above people and people are being raised above you. So when I take my car to my auto mechanic and he's looking at my car, who do you think has the advantage in that situation, him or me? Him. I don't know anything about, repairing a car. In that scenario, he can tell me whatever he wants. One person said that he knew a mechanic that whenever he said, hold on, he would go to the back, call his wife and say, baby, how much for that trip to Cancun? We can get there for $4,000? Okay, I got it. Yeah, man, it's gonna be about $4,000. Yeah, it's gonna be about $4,000. You gotta understand, you see your carburetor, man, your catalytic converter, it kind of needs to, he said, whatever amount of money he wanted to extract from the customer, he could come up with repairs to get that amount of money out of the customer, right? He's in the position of advantage. When you put your trash behind your house in your alley, who has the advantage? You or the people who come and pick it up? The people who come and pick it up. Can you imagine how your life would be if your trash wasn't removed? Right? Okay, I'll give you guys some Chicago history. Sometimes I know cool stuff, sometimes. Do you know why Chicago has alleys and New York doesn't? Who's ever been to New York City? Right? New York City doesn't have alleys, which is gross. They put the trash in front of the house. You're looking at this beautiful brownstone, and then you just see just a heap of trash, right? You're sitting, you're like in, on the Upper East Side or something like that, and Brooklyn Heights, and you say, man, that's a beautiful house. And then you just see rats running all through the trash. You say, I'll just go back to Bronzeville, man. I just take my little house in Chicago, man. Do you know why Chicago has alleys? Because after the Chicago fire, they rebuilt the city, and when they used to put the trash in front of the house, it was a lot of dysentery, rodents, rats, disease was being spread like that. Like trash sanitation, like sanitation removal, bro, this is like a major, major need in modern societies, right? The people who do that for us, they have an advantage over us, right? So you have to, when I talk about هُوَ الَّذِي رَفَعَ بَعْدَكُمْ فَوْقَ بَعْدٍ. God raised some of you above others. No, sometimes you're in a position of advantage, sometimes you're in a position of disadvantage. When you're in a position of advantage, what are you gonna do? You wanna hear something crazy, man? When I was in Egypt, I used to work as a translator. And I was working on this project, and the money was good, right? It was like this wealthy mumawil out of the Emirates who loved an Egyptian scholar named Sheikh al-Sha'rawi. And his life's work was like, we have to get Sheikh al-Sha'rawi's tafsir into English so English-speaking people can read this. And he funded the project all by himself. We translated every volume of the Tafsir of Sha'rawi. And this man paid for it out of his own pocket. And he paid top dollar. We were being paid like $35 per like 300 words or something like that. Which in Egypt, that's big money. You know, you think, I mean, you can translate 1,500 words in a day. So in Egypt, that's big money. When I went to the translation office, I saw the people and I was introduced to the staff and introduced to the translators. And then the person for whom I was working, he said, the rate that we're paying you, of course we're not paying the Egyptians. We're not paying them. The person, he was Egyptian himself. He said, this is what they're being paid, but we know that we couldn't pay an American like that and expect an American to work hard for that, paltry sum of money. And I was like, oh my God, this is what it feels like to be white. No. I said, I was like, oh. No. It was really like a moment. I was like, he was really telling me like, you're being paid triple what they're being paid. Because we understand that this is just kind of like, what they're being paid is a good rate for them. Because they're Egyptian, they make, that's like, before an American, come on. And I was like, oh my God. And it gave me some perspective, because I said, if you're put in that position, it's hard to be the person that says, no, I insist on fairness. No, guys, I'm not joking. I'm not kidding. I was like, yo, if for me to have integrity as a black man in America, I should be saying, hey, this isn't right. Equal work for equal pay. If they translate like we translate, they should get paid like we get paid. Man, I didn't say nothing, man. No. Brother, look, y'all supposed to be my brothers and sisters. Y'all laughing at my pain. This ain't Kevin Hart, laugh at my pain. I'm saying, this was really a moral dilemma for me. I was like, if there was a white person in the same circumstance and I found out, I would say, this is everything that's wrong with America. This is what we've been doing, double work, getting half the pay. This is everything that's wrong with America. But now that I'm in that position and I see the test, it humbled me. I said, am I gonna, hey, no, this ain't right. He said to me, but please, don't say anything. And I said, okay. No. And every time I would get paid, I would think, wow, this subhanAllah, that's crazy, man. But I would say, hey, man, you guys are doing a great job. No, you guys are doing a great job, man. And walk out of there and go to the currency exchange and change, because they would pay us in US dollars. They would pay them in Guinea. They would pay us in US dollars, cash money, every month. And sometimes we would walk out with so much money, we had to put it like in bags and stuff like that. They would pay us cash money. And I would just think, this is why being in a position of advantage is a test. I don't think I passed that one. But the question becomes, when you are placed in, and I'm sharing this with you guys just full transparency. Like, that really happened to me, where I was just like, dang, what am I gonna do? Now, where I think I tried to redeem myself was that, when we would have exams at Azhar, you had a tahriri and a shafawi. You had a written exam and you had an oral exam. And it was just my habit that whenever we had oral exams, I would always come to school when I would wear a jacket and a tie. But nobody else would wear a jacket and a tie, right? And so once my teacher, my proctor who was testing me, he looked at how I was dressed and he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "America." And he said, "American Muslim." Right? He said, "American Muslim." And he said, "هل تحب Obama?" He said, "Do you love Obama?" And this is before the drone strikes. This is like when Obama first got elected. And I said, "طبعا إحنا بنحب Obama. We love Obama." He said, "خلاص نجحت." He said, "Don't worry, you passed." Now, my entire firqa was West African, right? We're in the Maliki firqa. They were all West African. And they were looking at me like, yo, we're getting grilled over like 300 pages of memorization. And and I looked at them, I was like, no, just ask me some questions too. I mean, I'm a student here like everybody else, and I prepared and I'm ready for this exam. You don't have to like take it light on me because I'm American and something like that. He was like, "Okay, what are the arkan of wudu? How do you make wudu?" I told him. He was like, "Okay, najat." I looked at him, I said, "Guys, I tried. I tried, you know what I'm saying? I tried. But I mean, sometimes you're just in a position of privilege. And the question becomes, what are you going to do? But poverty is a different kind of test. Being disempowered is a different kind of test. And the reason I always say I would take the test of advantage over disadvantage, wealth over poverty, is because poverty can make a person cynical about life. Sayyidina Umar, he said, وَلَوْ كَانَ الْفَقْرُ رَجُلًا لَقَتَلْتُ. If poverty was a man, I would have killed him. Poverty is something that makes it difficult for some people to live with dignity. This is why, as a community, we should be dedicated to lifting people out of poverty so that they can have dignity, self-respect. But if you, as a believer, are tested with poverty, try to be patient. Try to be patient. Don't do anything that would compromise your dignity. Don't do anything that would compromise your self-respect. Many people do things that compromise their self-respect in poverty, and when you ask them why they did it, they say, "Well, I didn't have a lot of opportunity. I did what I had to do." The thing about that is that if only they had more faith, they would know that anything God gave you through the haram, God would have given you through the halal. You didn't get anything through selling dope that you couldn't have got through working a job that didn't hurt people. You don't get anything through selling liquor that you couldn't have got through selling food. You don't get anything through selling fake insurance policies that you could have got through, that you couldn't have gotten through selling, I don't know, that's like bad and bad. I don't know. What's the opposite of a fake insurance policy? Not a real one, not a real insurance, because they're both rip-offs. But there's nothing you get through the haram that God wouldn't give you through the halal. Just have faith. Just have faith. And one of the characteristics he highlights about the Sahaba is that when they were tested with poverty, they bore that test patiently. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر